Hello, hello, and welcome to another edition of Wander and Muse. I'm Heather Wolpern, your host, and today's guest is Sculptor Al Glann. Hello, Al.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing so well. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful day here.
It's raining in Tucson.
Yeah, it's unheard of lately, right? So go ahead and tell the listeners a little bit about your work.
Okay, I've been doing sculpture basically my whole life. So
Were you really good at Play-Doh when you were a kid? And
I worked outside. Anything outside I could work to build stuff with, I did. So
oh, that's cool.
I grew up on a farm and I wanted stuff, I made it. I had tunnels over the barns and everything.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
and all that
awesome.
stuff. So yeah, building stuff came second nature. And then I went to art school for illustration and graphic design. But anytime I could do a three-dimensional project, I'd slide it in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worked out in the field about 7 years and got tired of sitting at a desk all day. So I went back and started teaching,
Good.
which afforded me facilities to
Definitely.
go back and kind of actually create more dimensional work.
That's fantastic.
So from that point, I started doing sculpture, and then it just kind of kept moving forward. 12 years ago, I was doing a show with a friend of mine up in Phoenix, and he said, "What if we do some horses for the Arabian Horse Show next year?" And I said, "Good idea. I'll do some horses."
Yeah.
So I did some small ones. I mean, like really small tabletop size.
Right.
And Larry didn't do anything, so I was like, "Okay,
Great idea that
great
you're the
idea.
one following through with, right?
And so I showed it to some of my other artist friends, and they were like, "Yeah, those are pretty cool. Keep going with it." So
Okay.
it's like they just kind of evolved over time.
And did they get larger and larger as you went too, or not?
Over the years, yeah, they got full size. And
yeah, they're huge. I mean, what is the largest as far as height and width?
The largest one I have now is tail's about 9 feet in the air.
Yeah, that's huge. I love
know
that.
it's bigger than I thought it was going to be. It was like one of those things like, okay, here's the plan. It should be this big. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't plan on this being quite that big.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So you're welding with metal.
Right.
And how easy is it to source the metal that you're using?
Oh, that's not really an issue.
Oh, good.
I mean, I've got, I found places in Tucson that were really good after moving down here from Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And, over the years, these are good people to work with, sort of thing. So that's not really a problem. On my smaller pieces, I've taken the wooden or the steel sculptures, and we do molds and cast them in bronze.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. So the first time I went to the foundry, they're like, "You want to do what?" And I was like, "You guys can do this. You solve problems, don't you? Figure it out."
There you go.
Because they're very open and gestural. It's not a closed, solid piece. So it was a little bit more of a challenge for them to do them, but they figured it out pretty quick. And
right.
It's worked really well in that sense.
And you have a graphic design background, correct?
Yeah.
And so it's all very similar as far as just art for art's sake, as far as color, design, balance, that sort of thing. But what made the shift? Was it truly just that first project with the horse, or when did you go 3D?
I think I've always been 3D.
Right.
If I had a chance to do it, like in a commercial, we're doing, three-dimensional signage or something for a project, it was like, oh yeah, this is fun.
Right. What do you think it is about it? Just the spatial relationship of it all?
I like building stuff, basically.
Right. So the problem solving end of it too?
How do we figure this out? I mean, a lot of times I do sketches for a project, and then I had a public art piece I did a sketch for, and it was just kind of a whimsical, I got to do one more sketch. So I did something kind of, different from the other pieces. And they go like, yeah, we want to do that one. And I'm like, oh man. Yeah. So I'll make a model of that. So it took me about a week to make a model of it. And then it was kind of like, how are we going to make it bigger?
Right.
It has to go to 14 feet. And you're going like, and I spent, like a couple weeks talking to people and everything else. And like, how am I going to do this? Because I went down and talked to some different steel companies that do things. And they're like, well, that's about, $200,000 to $250,000 job.
Oh, goodness.
I'm going like, I got a $25,000 budget.
Right.
I can't quite do that. So it's like, middle of the night I wake up, which usually happens. It's like, oh, I have a solution. I'll do it like a wireframe. Like when I was teaching, like a lot of the, not that I taught animation, what they would do, or even 3D work on the computers is like they make a grid first.
Exactly, like a digital rendering.
Digital rendering, like if it's an environment or this or that. Here's where all the shapes are going to go. Then we'll layer it with textures.
Right.
So I can do the same thing. I'll do basically a wire grid on a 1/2-inch steel rod, and we can skin it.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's so interesting how there's so much engineering that goes into your artwork.
Yeah.
And how often you hear about how engineering firms will actually want to hire an artist because of this out of the box thinking and part of the problem solving with that artist's mind. So that's where you are, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a lot of it is the last piece I did, which was a big bucking horse, which is the two front feet are relatively close together on the base, and the rest of the horse is up.
How do you make that stand on
Slowly.
its 2 front feet? Oh my goodness.
But I made it, and it's kind of like, this thing's way too wobbly. So I was like, I have to go
Right.
back in and start doing, more structural.
Right. Counterlever.
Yeah, it's like, how do I, make this thing sturdy
Oof.
so it's going to stand there and make sure it's not going to come over, or.
And then shipping your pieces. I can't even imagine what that takes to crate them up.
A lot of my big
properly.
pieces I've delivered.
Okay.
Myself. So it's like, okay, I can wrap this thing up, and I've got photos of pieces in the back of my truck. It's like, okay, yeah, we wrapped it all up, we strapped it in, and we're taking it to Indiana. So.
Wow, that's amazing. So do talk about that. Where are some of your pieces now, whether it be galleries or people's homes or commercial areas? Talk a little bit about where your creations live.
Well, the horses are specifically, I've got those throughout the United States, Canada, England, Italy, Amsterdam, which is Netherlands, New Zealand, and Australia.
Wow. How did they discover you?
Just, they went to one of the galleries, and
really,
it was just like, oh yeah, we want that.
Really?
Yeah. And I had a really good sized piece that a couple in Amsterdam bought, and you're like, I don't even know what the shipping bill is going to be on this, but not my problem. But.
Right. Buyer pays for shipping.
Yeah.
And while our listeners are listening to this, if they want to go ahead and jump onto your website just so they can see what we're talking about, go to alglannsculptor.com, which is ALGLANNSCULPTOR.com, alglannsculptor.com, just so you can see what we're talking about, because it's really, I love your artwork, and just what you were saying before, how they aren't these solid pieces. there's air through them, there's spaces through them. You might see the horse's spine and tail, but it really leaves a lot to the imagination too, as far as connecting the dots.
Yeah,
so I love that.
Basically, I want to give you enough that you know what it is, but you get to fill in the rest.
Yeah.
So you become kind of an active participant in the piece. And I think the hard part, especially on larger scale pieces, is pieces just in space. I think this goes here. I've got a grid on, the base. And so this is going to be in square 3. It goes feet or inches, and that's where this joint should be.
Wow.
So you begin to kind of connect it like that. So
do you have pieces hanging on a pendulum almost as
pretty much, yeah. It's just I bring, a substructure underneath it to kind of place this should go here.
Wow.
I think.
I think, right.
But most of the time it's pretty accurate. But it's one of those things where it's just kind of like, why did I think this would be easy?
Exactly. Or have you ever totally screwed something up? You're like, oops, the tail's upside down. How did that happen?
Well, I did one, but the last one I did, the tail was too far down because it was up high and the angle was different. And I think partially because I couldn't get far enough away from it to see, does this look right?
Right. Then
I took it outside, I photographed it, and I looked at it and go like, that's not right.
Yeah. I remember one of my University of Arizona painting professors, Chuck Hittner, one of his good tips was, with your canvas, you should always turn it upside down and then look at it, because then you're looking at it more for the composition's sake and the balance rather than the subjectivity of it. And so you can't quite turn yours upside down, but it's the same sort of thing where you need to kind of look at it from away
Yeah.
before you can be more objective
Yeah.
about
Once
it.
I rolled it outside, got away from it, it's like, that's not right. What was I thinking?
What was I thinking? That's funny. So, and we were starting to talk about, all the places around the world where your artwork, where your sculptures are. But I do know that coming up, actually now through end of October, you are in a gallery in Prescott. So talk about that.
Well, actually, it's the Prescott Museum, which is a Western
Oh,
Art Museum.
museum. Gotcha.
Yeah, which they asked me about 3 years ago, do you want to do a
Oh.
solo show?
Ooh, that's an
And
honor.
I was kind of like, me? Well, because my work's not traditional, Western work.
Right.
And I was kind of like, you sure you're talking about me, right? Yeah, we want your work. I said, okay. So it's kind of progressed through that time period. And about a year and a half ago, I went up and I do some group shows there. And so they showed me, this is going to be your space. And I'm going like, holy smokes, how do I fill the space?
Oh,
it was
so it was large.
It was a lot of.
I thought you were going to say the opposite.
No,
like, this can
it
fit
was
two of my horses.
It was a big space. I'm going like, how am I going to do this?
Wow.
So it's like, well, don't worry about it. You can have, a lot of pieces. So I ended up with 37 sculptures.
That's a lot.
Including small ones and big ones.
Did you create any for that show? Okay.
Yeah, the one big one I did, and I had a wall piece I did. They said you can have photographs. So I had photographs of some of my public art horses that were in Tucson, and I had 8 paintings.
Oh, okay.
So I've done those kind of on the side. It's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, I can still push paint around, and they're based off the horses from the sculpture, but they're kind of more, to me, they're just more fun.
So even though artwork is typically the right side of the brain, do you feel that when you're doing your 3D sculpture versus painting on a flat canvas, you're kind of working different parts of your brain?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Or does it give you a different feeling?
It gives me different, well, having done illustration and stuff and having taught like color theory in those classes, it's kind of fun to get back and kind of, let's push paint around. But I mean,
definitely.
I do these pieces, they're basically plasma cut steel, because I do work on steel instead of canvas.
Oh, that's cool.
Only because of it I tried canvas, but it just didn't do it for me.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Like, what if I try steel? So that's kind of what I kind of went with on it, which is more work than it should be again. But it has a different look to it. It takes me a while to kind of get back into it. I had a couple pieces I wanted to do, and I'd started one in October, and it was like, okay, the show's getting close. I got to get this thing done and framed. And it was like in May, and I was like, okay, now I got to go back and finish this piece I haven't touched in 5 months.
Right.
And like the first day I'm there, I was like, man, it takes a long time to get back into it.
It does. You have to be in that groove. Exactly.
But it's like, I'm one of those, I think most artists are, and most creative people, it's like, you're really critical of your work.
Of course.
Oh, that looks like crap.
Right.
That doesn't look that good. Jeez.
Yeah.
You come back the next day, you're like, not too bad.
It's actually not bad.
Good.
Yeah. And then you see it with a new light once you remove yourself a little bit.
Well, a lot of it is because you're working so close, you're working on an area. I mean, whether it's a sculpture or a painting or drawing or whatever, I'm working on this one area at one time. And so that area is like, okay, and then, once you begin to see the whole thing, it's like, okay, it's coming together how I want it to.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that's truly the perspective with life in general. If you get too micro-focused on something, then your life is awful. Yeah. But if you remove yourself and take a look at the big picture, you're like, oh, actually, everything's
step back and take a look at it, think about it, stare at it for a while.
The philosophies of art. So where do you get your inspiration? Or especially those times when you're kind of feeling a little stuck, what do you do to get out of it?
I try to do something really quick.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of the horses and the birds that I've done, moose, bison, I'm looking for kind of a gesture drawing in 3D. I mean, that's kind of what since I get feels, I want to make it look like it's quickly done with these shapes and these forms to kind of define this animal or this bird, paying attention to the anatomy of it, the weight of it, the movement of it, the personality of it. But I want to kind of capture that feeling. So sometimes I need to do, one piece I did a small raven, and it was kind of like, you have a day to do this.
Oh, yeah. You probably work better under pressure though, huh?
Well, you can't stop and think about it. You just have to do it.
Yeah.
And if you have to change it later, that's fine.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's one of those things like you just need to do it, make it happen.
Exactly.
You've been doing this long enough. You should be able to make this happen. So it was about a day and a half. And I was like, okay, that works. I mean, I don't do that often.
Right.
Because it's just like you can't, there's so many things you're dealing with as far as the shape, if it's going to work right, it's proportion right. I can't make the same shape I made on a hip on a horse I did last year, so it has to be different this year.
Exactly, right.
So, it's one of those things that's kind of like, okay, now what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you have to stop and say, okay, I'll come back to you tomorrow.
Right, exactly.
Or next month.
Yeah. And having a deadline, though, is one of the best ways to get the creative juices flowing, though, when you have to get down to business. I have to get this done now. Exactly.
Well, having worked in advertising, it's kind of like, we know how to. Deadline is deadline, period. There is no extra time to do anything.
And what you were talking about, how you just have to get to it sometimes, that reminds me of a lot of times when I write something, whether it be a freelance thing or my own creative writing or whatever, it's what I call brain vomit, where you just, get your idea and you just write. But then you realize, okay, now I can go back, I can clean it up. You might as well just get it all out because that's how you're going to create something.
Well, I think sometimes it's, because like going out of the studio every day, when I quit teaching and decided to become a full-time sculptor, it was like, can I do this 5 days a week?
Right.
Because I've never done it.
And stay motivated. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can I go out and actually create? And sometimes you go out and you just kind of putter around for an hour. And it's kind of like, okay, just start doing it.
Exactly. Get to it.
It'll come to you at some point.
Exactly. And so you were saying that even as a young child on the farm, you were always creating things and that sort of thing. And when you went on to college, I believe you were at Columbus College of Art, was it?
Yeah.
And then went on to get a master's in education at NAU, Go Lumberjacks. Did you always have support from your family, or were you ever sort of like, I'm going to do this regardless of what you think, or that sort of thing?
Yeah, actually, they were surprising for a farm family. They were supportive.
Okay.
My dad had art talent.
Okay. So
he had probably the more natural art talent.
Okay.
The rest of us look at it and go like, I hate you because you can draw it so well.
Really?
I have to work at it, 3 times as much to make it go out as good.
Uh-huh.
But that didn't really matter. I mean, I wasn't trying to compete with anybody.
Sure.
I just, this is what I want to do. And so I didn't have art classes until senior year in high school. And I took them at a high school that had a night class on Thursday nights, 20 miles away.
Wow.
And the guy was like, here, try this. Here, try this. Let's do this. Here, try that.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa.
Just dabble in everything.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it because you never know.
Yeah.
That's
so fantastic. That was kind of where it started. And it kind of went from there. I ended up at a good art school at the time.
Right.
It was really kind of creative. And we were all working, to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because you had a ton of classes and a ton of work.
Exactly.
But it's like nobody cared.
Yeah. But you were doing what you loved.
What time did you get done? 3 a.m. Well, I got done at 2:30.
Yeah, well, exactly. Overachiever.
Badge of honor.
That's great. Even though you had the whole education and a solid career with graphic design and teaching and that sort of thing, was there a certain catalyst when you decided to do that leap of faith where you did decide to go full on sculpture?
I think. I quit teaching prior to quote unquote retiring.
Okay.
Because I put enough time in. I was tired of it. I loved it, but on the other hand, I'm burned out and I know it. And I want to do this. I want to see if I can do it.
Right.
So I bailed out of teaching and just kind of took the leap of faith on it.
Right.
And was just, I'm going to work.
Yeah.
Every day.
Just commit.
6 days a week.
Yeah. Sunday 6 days a week even.
I'll take Sundays off.
Okay.
I'll go do my yoga class. That sort of thing. But it's like, there were about 2 years there where it's kind of like, my daughter's like, what's wrong, Dad? And it's like, well, I'm spending X amount of money per month and I'm not having any money come in.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right.
But, it's like little things would happen. And then some major things came along. One year we had a public art piece I got picked to do. And then I had some big sales from one of my galleries out in Palm Desert.
Fantastic.
And it was just like, I can breathe now.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
That's all you need.
I can pay bills. And
Right.
I'm good. And I've got a little money left over. And
Right.
life is good.
Right.
Yeah.
And
so
then it
it's
just
kind of just
kept
expanded
coming.
from that.
Right. Exactly. And speaking of your public art, when I was on your website, alglannsculptor.com, I was looking all around, and in that public art page, the one in particular that I personally liked was Poetry in Motion. Just, oh, it's right there.
Yeah.
Is that, but it's smaller. Or is,
Yeah, that's the model.
oh, cool. I love it. I just love the movement of that. I love.
Yeah, that was the one where I did kind of that design, just kind of like, I'll do this design.
I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Like that. I really like that a lot. And then where else can people, whether in Tucson or elsewhere, find your artwork now?
Okay,
whether it be public art or other galleries or whatever.
Okay, the one gallery in town I have work at is Madeira's.
Mm-hmm.
Diana's been very nice about that.
Great.
I have 4 public art pieces up in Oro Valley.
Oh, okay.
Including the big 14-foot Poetry in Motion one, which is for the
Where's it located?
Stone Canyon Country Club,
Oh.
which I can't get into unless I'm invited.
Yeah, I was going to say. Right.
So unless you get invited in there, you can't see it.
Very exclusive.
Yeah, there's one, I did one for the Tucson Orthopedic Institute, which is kind of ironic since I just had surgery with them. And that's up in Oro Valley.
Could have bartered the sculpture for your hip.
I'll trade you a sculpture.
We should get back into bartering, really, don't you think?
I've done it before. I got 4 in Tucson. I got 1 down at the airport.
Okay.
Coming out of the airport, and then there's 3 along the loop. 1 east of Dodge Boulevard, and there's 1 west of Dodge Boulevard with a stainless steel horse, and there's another horse in Rio Vista Park.
Okay. And I saw you were at the Lanning Gallery in Sedona.
I was, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because the son of the Lanning, and Mrs. Lanning or whatever, lives in Tucson.
She sold it.
Oh, gotcha.
And then,
yeah, because I'm thinking of Bob Lanning.
Just before pandemic hit, they raised their rent on it, and so they said, "Well, we're not going to do it anymore. Come on, get your work." And then pandemic hit, and I go, "Yeah, it was good timing."
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
I've got the gallery, Coda Gallery in Palm Desert. I've got Murata in Denver, Acosta Strong in Santa Fe. So yeah,
that's fantastic. And then, how often do private individuals come for a commission?
Up until this past year, and I kind of quit doing them because I was kind of building my studio and getting ready for the big show.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing probably 3 or 4 commission pieces a year. I mean, big.
That's great.
Big
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Good for you.
I was like, okay, I got time to do this?
Right. Yeah. Well, before we wrap up today, what else do you want to share with listeners? Whether about like inspiring them to follow through with their dreams or.
Well, I think for artists, because I've got a couple of assistants I kind of work with who are, in their 20s and 30s. And it's kind of like, do what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're going to do it, but also, do it from a business standpoint too.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You have to eat. You have to have, if you need an extra job to survive, get a good extra job to survive.
Right, right.
And then, push your art. Don't be afraid to do it.
Right.
Somebody,
What's your number 1 tip for pushing your art?
Don't let anybody's opinion about it bother you. I mean, it's
That's
hard to do.
Right, but that's
I've had critiques of my work, oh, that's not worth that. That's this, that's, this and that. And that's kind of like, okay, that's your opinion. That's fine.
Yeah, right.
But I have other people who, I have one of my patrons who buys work every year.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, he collects all kinds of art, but apparently he likes mine too.
That's great. What a compliment.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
But I mean, he'll buy, like, he came into the studio, and I just finished a piece like half an hour before. I got it stuck in the vase for when we had the Full Moon Open Studios. And Bill comes in and says, "Yeah, I'll take that. Ship it back to Indianapolis."
Wow.
Like, you didn't even look at it hardly.
Wow. What an honor.
It's like,
yeah.
He's been collecting art for about 30 years. So
Fantastic.
He's got this big 5-story building that they make all kinds of things. I mean, they make like 18 parts for the iPhone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, from high technology to kind of basic things. But
that's great.
He's got artwork throughout the whole building.
Oh, very cool.
He's got sculptures, he's got paintings, and inside, outside, you name it.
Very cool.
It's like I share with my employees. Nobody ever quits this job.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And just the fact that he's supporting the arts. You gotta
Yeah.
love that. That's fantastic.
But I think it's a hard way to go. And, you have to find different ways to kind of make it work. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I was always of the opinion that, I'm not going to go do something else that I don't want to do.
Right.
I'm going to make the artwork somehow.
Yeah.
You know,
And look at you
if I
now.
have to do it just part-time, that's fine.
Right. That's
So
fantastic. Well, good. Well, it's such a pleasure to talk to you today.
thank you.
I'll remind everyone again to go visit alglannsculptor.com to check out his work. And thanks so much for listening to another edition of Wander and Muse. Search for Wander and Muse with Heather, and that'll be easier to find me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and go ahead and follow me. If you have any questions for me, or if you'd like to be a guest or a sponsor, email me at heather@wanderandmuse.world. Thank you so much for listening. Have a fantastic day.